Nearly 10,000 refugees and immigrants were detained in Canada last year, and over a third were held in provincial jails alongside inmates. It's a practice that has earned Canada criticism from the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees, and it costs the government millions of dollars. Under what grounds can refugees and immigrants be detained? Do non-criminal detainees belong in provincial jails, or are there any other alternatives to detention that government should consider? And joining the conversation tonight is Stewart Sharma, immigration lawyer in Calgary. And tonight in Toronto is Syed Hassan, member of the group End Immigration Detention. Welcome both of you to our show tonight.
Thanks for having me.
First off, Raj, let's go to you. When we mention refugees and immigrants being detained, who is it exactly that we're talking about here?
Well, refugees and foreign nationals and some permanent residents can be detained under the Immigration Refugee Protection Act. It varies, but generally speaking, if someone comes to Canada, makes a refugee claim, and there are issues as to identity or whether there could be a danger to the public or a flight risk, it is possible that those individuals will be detained until those concerns are addressed. When we're talking about refugees, generally speaking, they're detained because of a lack of identity. And you have to understand, Shauna, that these individuals are sometimes coming from desperate conditions, desperate circumstances, countries such as Somalia and Sudan, where adequate documentation is sometimes not available, and certainly the individual doesn't bring that with them when they come to Canada.
Let's talk about some controversial Canadian laws which speak to refugees, Raj, like Bill C-31. What are your concerns around that?
Well, it's just Bill C-31 is just one in a number of bills passed by the Conservative government that tends to scapegoat refugees, that tends to detract from Canada's humanitarian tradition. So what you've got with any number of bills, including, the Balanced Refugee Reform Act or whatever, we've got, we had the elimination of refugee health coverage, for example. We had different treatment for refugees based on their country of origin, for example. We have different rules based on how refugees come to Canada. So if you're designated as an irregular arrival, you could be in detention for up to a year. It also allows the detention of children, for example. So again, this is just a pattern of behavior to create a chilling effect in terms of refugees. And it goes with the rhetoric of both this minister and his predecessor, both Jason Kenney and Chris Alexander, have used this phrase, bogus refugee, and talked about queue jumpers. And it's all done in a particular way, in my opinion, to pander to a constituency a group, and it doesn't take into account that we're dealing with individuals that are facing difficult circumstances, and we are separating families, and to our shame, we are putting children in detention.
We do want to mention many other parts of the country, Ontario and BC, for example. In regards to immigration detainee centres, that's where they keep these individuals. In Alberta, we do not. So, Raj, just fill our viewers in on where exactly these people are being held.
Well, Shauna, I can give you a specific example. I had a client, a Somalian woman. She's pregnant. She was in Canada. She had made a spousal sponsorship. She had made a refugee claim. But some checks revealed that she had a prior claim in another country. And ultimately under a different name. And so what they did is they took her and they put her in the remand center. Now, the remand center is where we keep sort of, serious criminals. And there's a problem when we are putting individuals with no criminal records, and in this case, a pregnant woman, in jail in those types of conditions. And the remand center is not pleasant. It is a very, very difficult, very dangerous environment as well. And each time I would go to see her, I couldn't meet with her because she had to be taken by ambulance to a hospital because she was having health issues.
Hassan, I'm going to bring you into this conversation right now. We do want to mention international law does stipulate that, except for short periods, detained migrants should be held in specifically designated centres, not prisons. And so that is a big concern of your group, isn't it?
Yes, I think what we really want to start with, though, is to remind everyone that this notion of a just, fair, generous refugee and immigration system that people hear about is simply not true. Canada takes less refugees than Turkey, than South Africa, than Pakistan. Parents and grandparents can visit, but they can't stay. People who used to be able to come here as permanent residents can now only come here as temporary foreign workers. And as a result of this, over 500,000 people have chosen to live in Canada, made the difficult decision to stay in this country without immigration documents. These are people who work here, who pay taxes, but they do not get services, and they live in daily fear of detentions and deportations. This government has deported 100,000 people, and it has detained nearly 100,000 people. And so this is sort of the overarching system that we're dealing with, and what that means is that for us in Toronto and in Ontario, 200 immigrants in a maximum security prison in Lindsay, Ontario, went on a hunger strike nearly a year ago today. And since then, they've boycotted their judicial reviews. They've refused to be put on lockdown to essentially make some very simple demands. They want an end to maximum security incarceration. They're also held in provincial jails. They're asking for an end to indefinite detention, because Canada is one of the few Western countries in the world that doesn't have a limit on detention. And they're saying that the judicial review process should be overhauled. Obviously, for us on the outside, we oppose all detentions and deportations, but we are standing here in support of those three demands.
Let's talk about your group, End Immigration Detention Initiative. What is that? How did it get started, Hassan?
So, as I said, 200 immigrants who are in a maximum security prison in Lindsay, Ontario, a year ago went on hunger strike. And these detainees came together on the three demands I mentioned. And when they came together, what we've seen is that the government has actually gone after them. So we have immigrants who've been held for long periods of time, somewhere up to 10 years at a time, without trial and without charge. And these people are facing detentions, they're facing deportation, separation from their families and their children. So we on the outside have been organizing press conferences and public education, but we've also actually gone to the United Nations with the case of Mr. Michael Mavogo. And in June, the UN ruled in our favor to show that Canada is actually breaking international laws. We've also published an expose showing political meddling in the immigration detention system. I think as a result of these courageous actions by these immigrants inside prison without trial or charge, we've been able to really show how broken the entire immigration system is.
Let's talk about some of the research from your group, End Immigration Detention. Definitely doing a lot of research regarding immigration detention and finding some very important regional differences across Canada. The average length of stay in the Prairie region is 32 days versus the national average of 25 days. And in regards to release rates, 27% of detainees are released in Western Canada versus a release rate of 9% in Central Canada. Hassan, why do these rates vary so much across the country?
I mean, I think that is definitely one of the questions, is that, obviously deportation is the worst possible response to the federal government denying people status. Like, we oppose deportations, but on top of that, to detain people for these long periods. But then not only is it unjust and immoral and illegal, it's also internally inconsistent. And so in the prairies in Alberta in particular, there are 8 provincial prisons that people are being detained in. And yes, the average length of stay right now is 32 days, but just in 2009 it was 21 days. So the total length of time is actually increasing, and the total number of detentions in Alberta is increasing. And that's because the entire system is actually held together by ad hoc decisions that local CBSA officers are taking. You can't actually go and get adequate judicial oversight of the system. You can't actually go to court and have your day in court. Obviously, there are no trial or charges. And then on top of that, the immigration arbitrators, the ones who make the initial decisions on detention reviews, are basically deciding on the basis of their whim. So we have a broken system. It's internally inconsistent, and which just adds to the overall lack of citizenship that this government is pushing.
Raj, those statistics really do show a big regional difference. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, there's variations in the immigration system. There's no doubt about that. There's academic articles that talk about the different statistics. For example, even in the refugee division. So, your success or failure depends on the identity of your adjudicator to a large degree, and that's unfortunate. And I share a lot of the concerns that Syed has. That being said, there are some important things to note that there's the only oversight that we've got for detention review is something called an application for leave and judicial review to the federal court, which is not really an appeal. And of course, you need to comply with these sort of technical requirements. And so there's a real access to justice issue. How can someone in remand, where there might be some language difficulties, retain counsel to do a very complicated judicial review, for example? And that in Alberta particularly, we are having some massive cutbacks in terms of legal aid. And so, the Criminal Trial Lawyers Association has called for Minister Jonathan Denis to resign because they feel that he's dropped the ball. And certainly there's some massive access to justice issues, massive cutbacks to legal aid. So that's the problems that we're facing in Alberta, at least.
So bottom line, gentlemen, going to you first, Hassan, on this, what alternatives to detention do you believe need to be considered by the federal government?
I think that there is no justification for an immigration system that denies citizenship to poor and racialized families. There's just no moral legitimacy to this system at all. And so deportations and detentions don't make sense, right? The alternative to detention is community support for people to actually be given full immigration status, for communities to come together and be reunited with their families. And we need a total shift in the way the immigration system is working. And we need to really understand how it is working. So I think the alternative is an overhaul of the entire immigration system. But in the short term, it's an end to indefinite detention, because Canada is a rogue nation that's going contrary to international norms. It's an end to provincial prison and maximum security incarceration, and an overhaul of the judicial review process.
Raj, is an overhaul the answer? Do you agree with him?
Well, look, I would like to believe in unicorns and fairy dust too, but that's simply not going to happen. Countries will always determine who gets to come in and who we need to remove. There are some individuals that are foreign nationals in Canada that have abrogated sort of the social contract and do need to be removed from Canada. So no, I think that I focus on practical and pragmatic reform. And so what I would say is that there are alternatives to detention, and those alternatives to detention are, for example, our GPS monitoring. And those costs have come down, and GPS monitoring is far cheaper than housing them in maximum security provincial facilities. So practically and pragmatically, there's alternatives to detention, and it's time for us to start exploring them in greater detail.
Well, we really appreciate your conversation tonight, both of you. We've run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna.
That is Raj Sharma, immigration lawyer in Calgary, and in Toronto tonight, Syed Hassan, member of End Immigration Detention.